Damien and Sharon had been married since they were 21. Next year would mark their 20th anniversary. They had 2 children, a 17-year-old son named Jake, who was preparing for college, and a 14-year-old daughter, Ava. Life at home had always been predictable and steady. Sharon worked full-time and had her own hobbies. She was passionate about painting and had recently taken up rock climbing. Damien had his own interests, too. They had always balanced their lives well, maintaining their individual identities within the marriage, but for the past 6 months, something had felt different. It was subtle at first, just a sense that Sharon was somewhere else, even when she was right next to him. They still had their Sunday morning coffee dates and still went on their evening walks. But there was an undercurrent of distance, a feeling that she was present in body, but not in spirit. Damien asked her more than once if everything was okay. She always smiled and reassured him, dismissing his concerns as overthinking. He had no reason to suspect anything more. Emily wasn't the type to cheat, and she certainly wasn't the type to lie. Or at least, that's what he had always believed. Then, about 3 weeks ago, things took a dramatic turn. Sharon's energy shifted. She was suddenly home all the time, lingering near Damien in a way that felt almost desperate. She would sit in his home office, quietly reading or pretending to work on something, but there was a sadness about her. Strangely enough, their kids were acting weird, too. Jake, who was usually distant and preoccupied with his own world, was suddenly checking in on Damien, asking if he needed help with anything. Ava, who typically rolled her eyes at family dinners, had been overly sweet, going out of her way to spend time with him. It was as if they were all in on some secret. The one that he wasn't privy to. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They knew something he didn't, and whatever it was bad. Damien's paranoia peaked when he checked their phone bill 2 months ago. There was an unusual number, hundreds of messages between Sharon and someone he didn't recognize. When he confronted her, she brushed it off, saying it was just an old friend from high school. But when he checked her phone, the entire thread was missing. His mind wouldn't let it go. Desperate for answers, he called Jake. He laid everything out, the weird behavior, the messages, the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Jake went quiet before saying he needed to talk to Ava first. The next morning, Jake called back and told Damien he'd be coming home that weekend. "It's bad, but it could have been worse," he said cryptically. "Please, just wait until I get there." Damien's stomach twisted. He knew then that his worst fears were about to be confirmed. When Jake arrived home that Friday, he sat down with Damien and Ava. And that's when the truth came out. Sharon had been having an affair. It wasn't a coworker. It wasn't someone from her climbing gym. It was David, the husband of one of their close friends, a man who had been in their home, laughing over barbecues and holiday gatherings, a man Damien had trusted. Ava had caught them together. She had been in town with friends when she spotted her mother at a restaurant, sitting across from David holding his hand, smiling in a way that wasn't meant for just a friend. Ava had taken pictures, had confronted her mother later that night. Sharon had broken down, swearing that it was just a fleeting thing, that it didn't mean anything, that she had never planned on leaving Damien. It was just an escape, an infatuation, a moment of selfish indulgence. She had begged the kids not to tell their father, but Jake had refused to keep the secret. Damien packed a bag and left that night. Sharon collapsed onto the floor, sobbing as he walked out the door. He didn't care. He drove for hours, finally renting a small cabin in the woods, needing space to think. Jake was the only one who knew where he was. He visited the next day, sitting with Damien on the porch as they watched, the trees sway in the wind. "She's always been like this," Jake said bitterly. "She jumps from one thing to the next, painting, climbing, whatever new hobby she's obsessed with. This time she decided to be a cliché. Midlife crisis, an affair with a friend. How original." Damien didn't have words. He was numb. Sharon was relentless. She called, texted, sent emails, She refused to let go, refused to give him space. "I made a horrible mistake," she sobbed in one voicemail. "But I will not abandon our life over this. I will fight for us, Damien. I will fight for you." But Damien didn't know if he wanted to be fought for. He had always taken pride in his marriage. He had never once strayed, never even entertained the idea of another woman. And now, here he was, a middle-aged man, alone in a cabin, trying to figure out if the last 20 years of his life had been a lie. Sharon spiraled after the divorce. She had always been admired in their social circle, but when the truth came out, friends distanced themselves. She lost her community, her sense of belonging. She tried to reach out to Jake and Ava, but they refused to acknowledge her. They wouldn't answer her calls and wouldn't respond to her messages. To them, she was a stranger now. 1 year had passed since the divorce was finalized. Damien had moved into a beautiful new home, a place he had chosen not for memories of the past, but for the future he was building. The house was warm and inviting, filled with laughter, as Jake and Ava had chosen to live with him full-time. They rarely, if ever, spoke about Sharon. Sharon had attempted to reach out countless times, sending long, desperate emails and pleading for forgiveness. Damien never responded. More heartbreakingly, neither did her children. Jake had deleted her number. Ava had once opened a message from her mother, only to burst into tears before blocking her completely. Sharon struggled in ways she never imagined. She had lost the family she had once cherished, all for a fleeting moment of selfishness. David, the man she had thrown everything away for, had returned to his own wife, pretending as if nothing had ever happened. The affair had cost Sharon everything, and in the end, she had nothing to show for it. She spent her days alone in their old house, which no longer felt like home. The walls echoed with memories, reminders of what she had destroyed. Her social circle had shrunk. The friends who once invited her to dinner parties and weekend brunches had pulled away, unable to ignore what she had done to her family. In a desperate attempt to rebuild, she threw herself into new hobbies, trying to fill the emptiness. But nothing helped. Her world had unraveled, and no amount of self-help books could put it back together. Meanwhile, Damien had embraced his fresh start. At first, dating had been strange, even daunting, but soon he found himself enjoying it. He wasn't searching for a replacement for Sharon. He was simply allowing himself to be happy again. One evening, he sat across from a woman named Claire. She was kind, with a sharp wit that kept him on his toes. Their conversation flowed effortlessly. And for the first time in years, Damien felt something genuine stir inside him. "You seem lighter than when I first met you," Claire observed, smiling at him, "like you're finally seeing the future instead of the past." Damien exhaled, taking a sip of his wine. She was right. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. Somewhere across town, Sharon sat alone in her dimly lit house, staring at an unopened message she had typed to her children. Her hands trembled over the send button, but she knew deep down there would be no reply. Damien had moved on. Jake and Ava had moved on, and she was left with nothing but regret. For nearly a decade, Henry and Isabella had been inseparable. They met at university, bonded over late-night study sessions, and eventually built a life together in the coastal town of Newport. They had never been with anyone else, and their marriage had been, for the most part, a steady and beautiful one. They had their ups and downs like any couple, but things had always felt solid. Isabella was Henry's best friend, his anchor. They enjoyed each other's company, rarely argued, and had an unspoken understanding. Marriage, to them, had felt natural and effortless. Then, on a chilly evening last October, Isabella sat Henry down for a heart-to-heart. She spoke about their intimacy, or rather the lack of it. She admitted that she had never been overly passionate, and Henry had accepted that. They loved each other deeply, and when they did share moments of intimacy, they were meaningful. However, she confessed that her desire had dwindled entirely. She still loved him, but physically something was missing. Henry was stunned, but tried to be understanding. He figured it was something that happened in long-term relationships, especially since neither of them had ever been with anyone else. They agreed to reflect and revisit the conversation in a few weeks. When they talked again, Isabella told him there were things he needed to change, ways in which he had neglected making her feel special and desired. Henry took it to heart and made it his mission to show her how much she meant to him, and it worked. Their relationship rekindled in ways he hadn't imagined. For the first time in years, things felt electric between them. Then, 2 nights ago, everything unraveled. It was Isabella's birthday, and they had spent the evening drinking with friends. She had gone to bed early, and Henry, still buzzing from the whiskey, realized his phone was dead. Too lazy to retrieve his charger, he grabbed Isabella's phone to set an alarm. That's when he saw a message notification. It was from Ian, A.E., longtime friend of Isabella's from another city. Henry had met Ian a handful of times and knew that Isabella had always found him attractive, but that never bothered him. They had always been honest about harmless attractions. But something about the message gnawed at him. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was intuition, but he hesitated before opening it. When he finally did, his heart dropped. The thread was months long, filled with texts and pictures that left no room for misinterpretation. Explicit messages, conversations dripping with desire, mentions of a secret trip Isabella had taken under the guise of visiting an old college friend. Henry scrolled in disbelief, his hands trembling. He shook her awake. Groggy and still intoxicated, she denied everything at first. But as reality sank in, she admitted to it all. She blamed Henry, claiming he had made her feel unimportant for too long. In a blind rage, he yelled, said things he regretted, and stormed out of the room. By morning, they sat down for another talk. Isabella withdrew the blame and apologized, saying she would accept whatever he decided. But Henry didn't know what he wanted. She had continued the affair even after they had started fixing their marriage. That was the part he couldn't understand, couldn't forgive. If it had been a single mistake, a fleeting lapse in judgment, maybe he could find a way to move forward. But this had been a choice, repeated over and over again, even when their love was rekindling. Now, with Isabella away on a business trip, Henry sat alone in their home, lost in a storm of emotions. Love, hatred, sorrow. His world had been shattered, and he had no idea how to piece it back together. After the separation, Isabella's life took a turn for the worse. What had once been a structured and secure life unraveled quickly. Her affair with Ian fizzled out within weeks. He had no interest in building something real with her. Her once thriving career suffered as she struggled to focus, racked with guilt and regret. Friends distanced themselves, some siding with Henry, others simply uncomfortable with the tension. Loneliness crept in. The apartment she had moved into felt empty. Nights that were once filled with the warmth of companionship were now spent, staring at the ceiling, replaying her choices. She reached out to Henry more than once, but he had already begun moving on. He was polite but distant, unwilling to entertain the idea of reconciliation. Her attempts to build a new life felt hollow. Dating was a nightmare. Nothing felt real. No one seemed to truly care about her. Regret became a constant companion, whispering in her ear at every quiet moment. The life she had taken for granted was gone, and there was no way to get it back. Ian's life also took a drastic downturn after the affair was exposed. At first, he dismissed the consequences, treating it as just another fling. But karma had a way of creeping up on him. His long-term girlfriend, whom he had been keeping on the sidelines, found out about his betrayal and left him. His friends began seeing him in a different light, distancing themselves from the man who had betrayed his supposed friend. At work, things started to fall apart. His reputation, once untarnished, took a hit when whispers of his dishonesty and selfish behavior spread. Professional opportunities that once seemed guaranteed slipped away. Over time, he found himself alone, with no one truly there for him. Worse yet, Ian realized too late that the excitement of the affair had been nothing more than an illusion. He had sacrificed real relationships for fleeting moments of thrill, and now no one trusted him. He attempted to rekindle old friendships, but bridges had been burned. His life had become a series of empty encounters, his past mistakes haunting him at every turn. In early 2019, Henry made the painful decision to walk away. Their relationship had too many cracks, and the affair was the final breaking point. Though it took a few months to finalize, they separated in June and were divorced by October. And now, Henry could confidently say he was the happiest he had ever been. The first 6 months of his new single life were filled with experiences he had never had before. Brief flings, nights out, and rediscovering himself. It turned out to be an essential boost for his confidence, something he hadn't realized he needed. But then, the world changed. A global pandemic forced everything to slow down. During that time, a friend he had been secretly interested in reached out and asked if he wanted to be her quarantine buddy. They agreed, thinking it would just be a way to avoid isolation. But something deeper took root. One thing led to another. Henry found himself falling in love in a way he never thought possible again. They had been officially dating for a few months now, and despite the unusual circumstances, their relationship had grown stronger at an accelerated pace. He wasn't rushing to make any grand plans for the future, but for the first time in a long time, he felt truly happy. She made him feel loved, wanted, and special, something he had forgotten he deserved. For those who find themselves in their lowest moments, heartbroken and lost, Henry had one message: healing is possible. Love will always find its way, even after the deepest wounds.